Hi everyone. So in this video, I am going to talk to you today about my own personal experiences with the Sony A9III. So about 5 months ago, I decided to jump in and purchase the A9III. Now, why would I do that being a portrait photographer? Well, a couple of reasons, right? Like, first of all, I do some wildlife photography as a hobby. I enjoy getting out into nature by myself. I enjoy the fact that I don't necessarily need a subject to shoot, so I'm not working on anyone else's schedule. And I had the 2-600 lens, and I was working with the Sony A7R5. I also have the 4. And as much as I love working with those cameras, I really wanted to get that really quick frames per second. And now the A9 obviously does 120 frames per second. And I can honestly tell you that the only time I use it for wildlife at 120 is if I am going after really small, tiny birds. Now, having said that, there is a lot of talk about the file size and a lot of photographers wishing that this camera had more dynamic range. So for wildlife, if you're shooting subjects that are not filling the frame, yeah, it can be very frustrating. I know that I recently shot an eagle that was at a great distance away, and I really couldn't use the file. I really wanted it for portrait photography. Now, the global shutter, allowing you to turn day to night, was definitely a draw for me, but that wasn't actually the main reason. My main reason was the frames per second. If I shoot with continuous lighting in studio or even outdoors with natural light, and I'm shooting toddlers or small children, perhaps I could nail the perfect shot and not worry about, the eye out of focus missing, or darn it, I just wasn't shooting fast enough to get that perfect shot. Additionally, let's face it, the window of opportunity when you're working with small children and toddlers can be very small. And by very small, I mean, anywhere from 5 to 12 minutes sometimes. I know that if I'm shooting a toddler, let's say 12 to even 20 months old, sometimes their happiness factor and their enjoyment of the session is so brief that you just don't have time to get the perfect shot. Now, 120 frames per second is an insane amount of frames, right? Like, do you really want to cull through thousands of images for a 15-minute session? No, not really. I reduced the number of frames per second down to 60. Now, I've experimented with how many frames per second are ideal for capturing those nuances of expression with a child. And I would say anywhere between 30 and 60, but I tend to keep it at 60. And it's still a lot of files, guys. Like, I did a session yesterday, and I think I shot, it was 2 little girls. So we're talking I think she was 12 months old, and her older sister. And I think that the whole duration of time that I shot those 2 children for was probably 9 minutes, and I still got almost 700 images out of it, right? But keeping in mind that the key factor is when culling, what you can do is you can go through the roll on the back of the camera, you can lock the images that you want to keep, and you can just batch delete the rest if that's what you want to do. I personally tend to actually download them and go through them and select them that way because, let's face it, the screens on our cameras are kind of small. And unless you're zooming right into every single one, you're not necessarily going to be able to easily find the ones that you want to work with. So I tend to download them in Lightroom, cull them, go through them, and then delete the remaining, because you don't want to hang on to 12 gigapixels of images that you'll likely never use. Now, back in my Canon days, the file size was very similar to the file size on the A9III. And do I really need massive files for portrait work? Not necessarily. Is that amount of dynamic range nice to have? Yes. And specifically for wildlife, yes. Because when I'm shooting on my A7R5 or 4, and I shoot a bird that maybe is, tiny in the frame, takes up maybe 10% of the frame. On those bodies, you can zoom in and you can get a very decent usable file, especially if you're working with gigapixel. Now, on the A9III, doing that, not very good, not great for sure. That's why, unless you can fill the frame with your subject on the body, it's probably not going to be as desirable as the frames would be on one of those other cameras. Now, shooting a portrait outside in bright sunshine with a global shutter and off-camera flash is certainly a game changer. Like, I have used it now with dance subjects, I have used it with portrait subjects, and I can honestly say that I have never experienced a camera that is more adjustable and more easy to use than the A9III. I always bring two bodies to a session, so I'll have my A7R5 and I'll have the A9III, and I'm finding more and more I'm not bothering with the other bodies. And that's in spite of the fact that the file size is so much smaller. Again, it's because you fill the frame with your subject, there's no loss of quality. And I have to say that the autofocus on the A9III far surpasses the focus quality on either of the other two bodies that I own. But I think where the key factor for me was in adoring this body was being able to shoot a child with continuous light in studio, because as long as your light is set up correctly, then all you have to do is get down low, photographing that child, and you never miss the shot. And hopefully you'll have an agreeable subject that will give you at least a few minutes of happiness and great ability to emote some joyful expressions, and you nail that shot every time. I don't know what it is, but the focusing on this camera seems to far surpass the other two. Now, I have done a test where I focused on the A7R5 and I focused with the A9III, and every single time the A9III just locks onto that eye regardless of where the child moves, and those images are sharp. Whereby with the A7R5, a lot of times if the child moves away this way, the camera will lose focus, and then you don't have the frames per second anyway. So like I said, I tend to go more and more with the A9III at this point. So recently I was going to do this massive review video with this camera, and I had a ton of behind the scenes videos from all the shoots that I've done. I did rodeo, dance, children, all of that. And as some of you know, we recently sold our house and we downsized and moved into a much smaller house where I no longer have a studio. And in the move, I obviously personally, physically moved all my external hard drives just out of care and being terrified of losing one. And sure enough, I lost one hard drive. It was the one that actually houses all of the videos that I've ever created, as well as all the video that I had for the upcoming review video. So this video, sadly, is not going to have any behind the scenes. And for that, I'm super sad. It's been 2 weeks of me trying to kind of get over it. But at the same time, I thought, well, I still need to do the video. And even if it's just a talking head and showing you the images, I guess it's going to be better than nothing. Now, I didn't necessarily go any higher than 1/8,000th of a second on the shutter because I wasn't necessarily trying to turn daytime to night. When you're shooting at 12 or 1 o'clock in the middle of summer day, it's just harsh, nasty light, and I wanted to really reduce the highlights, meanwhile still filling the subject's face so that there wasn't a lot of shadow. A shoot I did just recently with a little 14-month-old girl while I still had my studio, of course, and I used the iFootage light, and I had it gridded, and I had it just at a 45-degree angle pointed down at her, and I got low, and I just fired off shots. And I have shot this child before, and I know how brief the moment of happiness can be with her. So for this one, her mother really wanted fairy portraits done prior to me not having access to my studio anymore, so we made that happen. And all of the fairy portraits I do now are composite work, so I make the wings in AI. I have a whole bunch of these wings that are up for sale in my store if you're interested, but I don't even use real fairy wings anymore. I just go for the composite factor because I've got it down to a science and I find it much easier. Additionally, with children this age, they don't like the wings. They're very preoccupied with them and they cry and they're not interested. So I find it so much easier just to do it this way. I didn't delete the images because I wanted to show you how it looks when you just fast forward through all the shots and you can see the actual movements. Now, I have yet to try this on dog photography. I'm dying to, so I need to find a subject so that I can test it. I will create a video of that when I do finally do that, but I have a feeling that that is going to be magically delicious as well. But what's my final thought on this? Oh my gosh, this camera is a game changer. Like, I can't imagine not having access to these kinds of features anymore. Like, they have transformed my joy for shooting. I am not gonna lie. Just the struggles of, trying to get that shot on toddlers, trying to get that perfect move on dancers, trying to make sure that you don't miss the shot if you're shooting, let's say, rodeo and, bucking broncos and stuff like that. It really has completely transformed my joy as well as my ability to nail the shot.